All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our SOAR Growth Series. For those of you that do not know me, I am Stacy Danheiser, host of SOAR Marketing Society, and really excited for today's topic. SOAR Marketing Society is a free B2B marketing community. It's online, hosted through Mighty Network. Our entire purpose and mission is to help marketers elevate their confidence, their credibility, and the impact that they're making at the table. So just to give you a little bit of context where this kind of topic fits in, so our guiding principle is really this confident marketer playbook. There are many steps to creating content and to creating marketing programs and offers and promotions, kind of all the way down the funnel. And yet there's so much work that needs to go into the prep and the planning beforehand. So, everybody kind of wants to start at step 8, which is to execute, but there's a lot of strategy kind of behind the scenes to make that effective. So today's topic is all about step 3, which is gaining new insights. And specifically, we're going to talk about how to gain insights from your customers. So I'm very, very excited to welcome Ryan Paul Gibson. And for those of you that maybe follow him on LinkedIn or social media, you'll know that he's a huge advocate of getting direct feedback from your customers. Marketers don't always have access to customers, so we have to rely on the sales team or the customer service organization or other customer-facing departments. But hopefully, today, Ryan's going to give us some advice as to how marketing can get in front of customers and to feel more confident while conducting those interviews, and then really what to do with all that information. So Ryan has interviewed, I think, 1,600 customers in his.
Yeah, I'm getting closer to 17 now.
Oh, wow. 1,700.
I have to change my stat.
Yes. So he is for sure the expert. And I love it as well because he has a journalism background. And I think journalism and marketing kind of go hand in hand, coming with that curiosity and being able to ask really good questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and welcome.
Thank you.
Which is the one that Light told me about.
Okay.
So
I don't know if you want Karina on mute there.
Yeah.
Hey, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan. Maybe just a bit about my background as I get set up here. So, yeah, I do have a. Oh wait, is that my? That's not what I want. Can everyone see this? This nice, lovely slideshow. Perfect.
Yep.
I do have a bit of a background in journalism, but I spent pretty much 20 years in B2B. And I started off actually in sort of a sales business development role and migrated over to marketing over time. I was one of the crazy people that liked marketing. But I did take a bit of a sabbatical, I guess, or a detour. And I was an investigative journalist for about 3 years in TV and radio. And that's really where I cemented a lot of my process for speaking to people. So what I'm going to show you today is a section of a new course I'm building, because that's what everyone does now. And but it's, I think, a really good foundational piece for getting started, right? For how you would approach customer research interviews, how would you use them in marketing, and just how to get those insights to really inform your go-to-market strategy. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I may not see them, Stacy, so just if you see them and you want me to address them, happy to do that. Or just raise your hand. I'm pretty easy when it comes to this stuff. So I like to start off with this statement. I start off most of my presentations with this statement because I firmly believe this to be true. And what I mean by that is buyers typically just don't care about the framework you decide that they should go through. They care about their own. Yet we have all these different formats and funnels that we've looked to over the course of decades to try and guide our decision making for how people should move through a purchasing motion. The marketing funnel I have here in the up in the high corner, sometimes sales purchasing funnel. Fun fact, it's actually over a century old. I don't think a lot of people know that. It was developed in the 1800s. Exactly. So that sort of, I think, gives you some context of like how long we've been thinking about how buyers move along stages of intent, right? But yet it's still the dominant format, even though it's over 100 years old. over here, the wheel is the flywheel. HubSpot usually gets credit for it, but it actually came to fruition before them. They just sort of brought it into prominence. This is the McKinsey purchasing model. Really, it was born out of a study that McKinsey did years ago with about 20,000 purchasers, I believe it was that many. It was a massive sample size. And they spit out this formula for how people go through a decision-making process. It was about consumer goods, but I find with now SaaS moving to sort of low cost, DIY, self-install, comes out of a discretionary budget, this actually maps really well to some of the SaaS purchases we see. And then my favorite, which is more of an innovation framework, but I'm going to explain why I lean into it, is jobs to be done, which I think a lot of product people might be familiar with. It's an innovation framework for figuring out new feature sets, new products, and so on. That's sort of the genesis of it. But I find it's actually a really great guide for understanding how people make decisions about existing products. And I use it because buyers in B2B, they don't just wake up and buy a thing, right? There's a gradual tipping of the scales that happens over time, right? They're exposed to problems, they prioritize those pains and problems, they maybe start looking for solutions, then they really start looking for solutions, and they evaluate them, and then they create a short list, and then maybe they talk to the sales team, right? There's a whole, that can be months, it could be years. I've spoken to people who've taken years to evaluate products, right? And they didn't buy until the time was right. Here's the thing though, this is where most of our businesses spend their time and money in marketing, right? On that high intent, easy to capture, ready to buy. And if you look at most of the studies from the big names like McKinsey and Gartner and Forrester, they'll tell you on average, 3 to 5% of your market is ready to buy at some point, because they're at this part of the journey. But so much of the marketing and buying journey happens here, and we don't spend a lot of time focusing on that as marketers too often. But that's your holistic go-to-marketing strategy, because they just don't wait. Like I said, they don't wake up and start here. There's a gradual progression they go through over time. And if you don't know what that is, you're going to have a hard time influencing that with your marketing, right? You're going to be spending a lot of money trying to figure things out, and you might run out of money pretty fast. So I love research because Stacey mentioned, the confident marketer. It gives you clarity and confidence around where you think you need to throw the dart strategically in your go-to-market strategies and tactics, right? I like customer interviews because I think they give you the deepest dive into that. And that's what we're going to talk about. Before I do that though, types of research, right? Primary, secondary. Primary is stuff that you have gone out and gotten yourself. Secondary means you're relying on other people's data aggregation and you're interpreting those results. So secondary is like trade media, associations, research papers, reviews. So like reviews of a product that could be your own or G2. Forums and networking groups, like Stacey's networking group, like that can be a place where you go and get data. And sales calls I had there as an asterisk because I think they live between primary and secondary research. And the reason I say that is they are just a snapshot of a conversation someone else had with one of your buyers, right? And it's at the end of that buying journey. It's not that whole full funnel that you would see and you're trying to investigate. So I would say sales calls are good, but they're limited. Primary is when you go and get it all yourself, and that can be surveys, focus groups, observational work, which is me just like viewing what happens, and I've done that work before. But I like interviews because I find it gets you the quickest insights the fastest, and it's really about how you conduct that process. So I define a research interview as in a certain way. If you're on LinkedIn a lot, you might see it as, well, you just have to talk to your customers. Well, it is that, but it's much different than that. If you're doing it well, it's going to feel like a friendly conversation, but it's actually an investigation on how did they start? They started here. How did they get here? And what are all the actions and behaviors and storylines and narratives that existed in that journey? And then how are you collecting them to analyze that data? So it's a structured conversation grounded in a research objective about statements of facts, behaviors, and actions. Much very different than just chatting, having a friendly chat with one of your buyers or customers. right? There's a reason and rationale for how you're approaching it. I look at them in 5 parts. So I like to break it down in 5 chunks just as I talk about it, because I find that's the easiest way to digest it. The first is choosing the type of interview. I focus on buying journey. I've heard the term marketing discovery before. I think MJ Peters uses that, and she's on LinkedIn if everyone follows her. I like that term. But there's different types of customer interviews that you can have, and I'm going to show you what some of them are. The second part is setting the objectives. Remember, this is research, so you need to have some sense of why you're talking to them in the first place. And you have a working rationale or hypothesis or whatever term you want to use about what you believe to be true and what you're trying to go and understand, right? You're not trying to confirm existing beliefs. You're trying to learn and understand if something is true or not. The third part is like, who do you talk to? And that sort of falls in line with the type of interview you're going to have, but there's still specificities within there about who you want to speak with. Then you got to figure out how you're going to go find these people. And there's different ways you can find them, because it doesn't just have to be your customers. And then conducting the interviews, which is sort of the last step. There's also organizing the data, and I'll show you a bit of that at the end. How am I doing, Stacey? Am I going too fast? Good?
No, I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay.
We're good.
So thank you. First part, type of interview. So the first one's what I do, which is how and why buyers buy. I care about that entire holistic journey from start to finish, when they first have a thought of, oh, this sucks. This is going to be a problem someday. And then they go all the way to like, here, take my credit card. Thank God you're here. So what happens in all that? There's so many things that can happen that I can influence as a marketer. I want to understand that. But there's also sales audit conversations where, win-loss or close-loss, where we want to try and improve our sales motion, especially in B2B, if you have like medium to enterprise sales motions. Churn or win back, they left. Why? Can we get them back? User UX. So how are they using your product and navigating through it, and what improvements can we make? There's brand and identity, which is what buyers and customers perceive your brand to be, not what you believe it to be, what they think it is and how they define it. And then what is the misalignment or the gap between those two beliefs you hold. There's customer discovery. A lot of founders and startups will use this one, where I'm evaluating whether there's some type of serviceable addressable market that I can tap into to sell a product. And what would that be? And then buying committee, which aligns along with sort of ABM, strategies now, where if I'm in a medium to enterprise market, there might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stakeholders in a deal over the course of any given period. How do they all work together? What do they care about? How do I need to work with them all together, right? Just trying to understand that one piece. So there's more than just what I do. There's lots of different types of interviews that you can conduct as a researcher.
Yeah, question on that. I mean, can you like marry some of those up together so you can have more than one, I guess, format?
I look at it as there's overlap, right? I'm a purist in the sense that I think if you have one research objective, which I'll walk you through in a sec, you want to focus on that. And then you can do other research interviews to sort of ascertain something different. So what I mean is, I had a client once that wanted to understand why people were buying, but they also wanted to understand some new service lines that could create in the business. And I said, we might want to do that separately, because it's very easy to have a 45-minute to 1 hour conversation about each of those subjects. Things you'll glean into each other, those things, right, as you have a discussion with whoever you're talking to. But I like specificity based on my objective, because then I'm focused on that one piece of the business that I want to solve at that point in time, and then I can move on to the next. So it's not, I think it's okay to do, but I would always caution about, are you diluting the level of insights you're getting?
Sorry, I had a question, and I don't know if you're going to go through this later, but
we'll find out.
On some of the more difficult type of interviews, like churn and win back, right?
It's tougher.
Are you sharing any best practices on how to get the clients to actually attend or engage?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Because I haven't done a lot of that work. I know there's sometimes incentivization that happens.
Mm,
A lot of times, and that could be either, come on back for X, Y, Z amount of time for free. Sometimes it's just you want to approach them about understanding what it is, why the product is no longer a fit. Because sometimes companies graduate out of products, right? So like think of just CRMs. A lot of startups sometimes use Pipedrive and they graduate to HubSpot, and then sometimes they go into Salesforce if they're big enough, right? Not every product services every type of business model exactly the same way. I think one person you might want to follow on LinkedIn is Anita Toth. She is a fellow Canadian, such as myself. Her nickname is the Churn Crusher, which is a wonderful nickname. And she's just a great human. And she has lots of great tips around that, Karina, about like what you might be able to do to sort of get people engaged in those conversations. Anita Toth, ANITATOTH, Anita Toth. I can drop it. I can send her link around later if Stacy's sharing anything with people, and I can.
great. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Thank
Hey,
you.
no worries. I wish I had a better answer for you. It's just not always the scope of my work, but those are some things I'd try in the beginning. So setting objectives, because when you're conducting research, you want to be very specific about what you're trying to understand. Otherwise, the conversation can go all over the place, and that's not what we want here. I've decided that there's distinct things that I want to understand about the business and my buyers, and use those to my advantage inside the company. So how do I get at what those objectives might be? Like, how do I set them? What should I focus on? There's a few ways that I think of it. One is figuring out, okay, well, is there a type of customer interview that I want to have? Sometimes, though, that's cart before horse, and I might want to look at what's happening in the business where we see issues. And that could be gaps in our customer knowledge. So, is there things we don't know about our customer or buyer that we really need to understand? Exact things like, what are they doing before they come to our website, right? What are they trying to learn and understand? Like, what is it? Why do they come upon us in the first place, right? What is it, the issues they're trying to solve? It could be your annual operating plans. So things like revenue is not meeting its forecasts. You have a new feature you're going to launch. It could be that, one I worked on, which I'm going to show you a little bit, is there was an acquisition and it just wasn't tracking with the acquisition that was brought into the product portfolio for a SaaS company wasn't selling as they thought it would be. And sales was coming back to us and saying, we think something's wrong. So we got tapped to go and figure out what was wrong, what we thought might be wrong. Politics and debates about who the customer is, which is always a nice one. If you've worked in a company, you've probably had these. And if you're getting a lot of I statements, like I believe this to be the case, or someone says, I think this is what the customer wants, and I, or you're spending more time debating about who the customer is and what they care about rather than executing on things, that could be a sign that you need to get aligned on what the customer identity and your ideal client profile. This is a great way to sort of get that whole alignment around sales and marketing that we all dream about, but often struggle to get. And then sales team, right? They're often the canary in the coal mine. They'll come to you and say, I've been talking to these customers and they think we're crazy because we're saying this and they're expecting that. I think something's off. So there's all these ways you can figure out, like, well, what is it that I want to go know? I want to go know and set objectives. And it can't be too general or loosey-goosey. You want to have some, like I said, some distinct specificities in it. So if you're trying to launch a new feature and it's going to be a paid feature, rather than saying, well, would they pay for this? Let's go figure if they're going to pay for this. It's a horrible way to start research because you're already sort of you're already biasing their research. What you want to understand is, do they have these problems? Does X buyer have these priorities that they can accomplish with whatever Y is now? And would this feature help? Right? Like, that is a much more grounded way to approach it, an objective that makes sense. Or our sales process needs work. Sure, everybody's probably does. Here's one that I actually pulled from a client I was working with. They observed that high value leads were taking 3 times longer to close. Could they shorten the cycle? Now, sometimes high value contract leads in B2B do take longer to close because there's just more money that you're playing with, right? There might be more due diligence that's needed. But that doesn't mean that there's not a way that we can maybe shorten that sales cycle. Maybe there's some things we're missing. So we want to have, these are important because this then directs the conversation I'm going to have and unlocks what I want to know to improve the business. Any questions about that? This one's always a little bit vague for some people.
So you're basically saying, asking a hypothetical situation or getting them to compare it to something instead of like a yes, no.
Correct. Remember, I want behaviors, actions, narratives, stories. Those are the things I want to understand. So if I want to launch a new feature and try and generate revenue off it, 9 times out of 10, what you often see is people will build a thing and I'll say, look at this. Would you use this? Of course I'd use that. That looks great. And then when it's put out in the real world, you get tons of objections and maybe it is not the thing. A better methodology is always, okay, walk me through your priorities. Oh, that's an interesting problem you have there. How do you solve that problem? Okay, great. What are some of the ways that you wish you could solve that problem? Right? Things like that. Whereas, because then what you're trying to understand is a feature that we're thinking of building actually aligning to how they're solving, they can potentially solve that problem. Rather than me just asking straight up, would you buy this? Right. So that's objectives are really crucial because they ground the discussion in not just they focus the discussion. They let you know what's out of bounds, right? Because if you start going into a direction where customers start talking about all these different things, because it happens, people talk in very, they go on tangents. You can bring them back and look at your objective and say, okay, that's great. That's wonderful. Thanks for the feedback. I'd like to get back to this now. The objectives keeps you focused.
And I think Jody had a really good question about maybe related to objectives. Where she says, as a copywriter, she's always looking for the feeling behind the purchase.
Yeah.
But if you're only asking questions about facts and behaviors, do you ever listen for feelings as you conduct the interviews?
I do. So it's a great question because I often say I don't want opinions and hot takes, which is almost not helpful for marketing because that's a lot of what social proof is, copy is, content can be. But what's really great when you interview people is when you ask them things like, walk me through the first time you struggled with this problem, right? And say your solution solves X problem. Walk me through the first time you were struggling with X. What happened? People will use very colorful language around that to describe the pain and the problems they feel. So I don't even need to prompt them. They will speak in that cadence, right? So although I'm taking a very clinical approach to how I'm asking the questions, what they're giving me back is a lot of language that's seeped in emotion, right? As well as actions and behaviors. So it's a good question. And then sometimes what I'll do is at the end, if we want to do some type of business performance or case study work, you'll ask those standard things like, so what's different now? If I had to take it away from you and you couldn't use the tool anymore tomorrow, what happens in your world, right? And then you're really going to hear those answers, right? So it's a good question though.
Perfect, thank you.
My pleasure. So part 3, who to interview? You want to start with the person, you want to figure out the person you want to interview and the business you want to interview, right? So the firmographics of your ideal client profile, if that's who you want to go learn more about. What are the types of business? What's the revenue threshold? What verticals are they in? Where do you think what sandbox are you going to play in the best? Then the person within that business, right? Because there's going to be a specific user and buyer. They could be the same person. They could be separate that you want to speak to. That's where you want to start. And they need to fit your research objectives. You want to try and get apples to apples as best as possible. So what I mean by that is, if I was going to run a series of interviews, if I was going to talk to a software DevOps lead who supervised 100 engineers, and then the next interview I had was with a hospital IT director with 5 engineers, their business models and what they're trying to do is probably dramatically different. So when I'm trying to analyze and get the aggregate of all the different interviews and gather insights, because that's what I'm looking for at the end of the day, is patterns and themes. They're going to have very dramatic experiences, and then I'll have less statistical relevancy in the data, right? And that's not what I want here. What I want is, I want to find the commonalities amongst the journeys of these ideal buyers. So if I look at this other example, that same SaaS DevOps lead who's supervising 100 engineers would be more similar to a SaaS CTO who's supervising 20 engineers. Still not perfect, because you're never going to get perfect. It's qualitative research. But I'm getting closer to who I think is a better fit for this product that or service that I'm trying to sell. Apples to apples is as best as you can get, right? Now you're going to go five. Yes.
Sorry, question real quick. David had a question that maybe fits right there, which was, making sure that you're finding customers that actually know enough about their own needs to be able to provide useful insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not everyone, here's a really good example. So I did one in January. Is a SaaS company. They were in the media and journalism space. And their users, 70% of the time, were never involved once in the purchasing decision. They just sort of were given the software one day and they had to use it. But for me, as someone who studies buying journeys, they were talking to them wasn't so helpful because they didn't fit the objective. I want to understand why the problems existed in the first place within these newspapers and media companies, and how they gradually made their way to purchasing this software. But if the user was never involved, they're not going to give me much valuable insights. So yeah, you have to make sure the person you're talking to actually can answer the questions. And sometimes you won't get a ton of deep insights from a single person, even though you might, and that happens sometimes. But if I don't talk about sample sizes here, but on average, if you can interview between, the rule of thumb is like 8 to 15 per objective. So if you get 8 to 15 people, usually you'll have 1 or 2 that have, maybe are providing fewer insights, a couple that have a tremendous amount of insights, and the rest are sort of in the middle of the bell curve. It all sort of evens out in the end. Now you're going to find them. How do you do that? CRM is the best place to start. Especially if you're talking to existing customers, because those are the easiest people to get. Customers that are happy, have just recently closed, have given you reviews, good reviews, have done case studies, what have you, right? Your relationship is strongest with them, so the odds of getting them to book a 45-minute conversation with you are the highest, right? And you also have all those firmographics we're looking for. Typically, not everyone's CRM has all that, but for the most part, that's probably where you'll go. Referrals from networks. So if you have a sense of, I want to talk to this person and I want to talk, this is sort of the framework of the business that I want to talk to, you can go to your network. You can find people on social media, networking groups. There's paid panels and user groups. So some are like user interviews, respondent, winter, you can do that. And what that is pay to play. So you're paying to access existing panels. I'm working with user interviews. Just today, I worked with my account manager on finding a certain framework of people. It's in the finance space and VPs. And they said, okay, we have 200 people that meet all these firmographic criteria in our database that you could potentially reach out to. And it's a much faster way than trying to find them through all these other areas of like referrals and social media. It's just going to cost you an investment. And then reviews or third-party sites. So if you go to like G2, there are people who have identified that they are available to speak with about their purchasing decisions. And their LinkedIns are there, the Twitter handles are there. You can go out and find people, even on your competitors' review sites for G2, and see if you can speak to a competitor's customer. So there's all sorts of different ways you can find people. And when you reach out to them, you want to be very specific about the ask. You are not selling anything. And I put that in an exclamation point there because people are so sensitive to solicitation now, I find, that if they don't clearly understand this is a research exercise, there's a chance they will ignore your email, right? And you want to explain what you're talking about. We think you have a good wealth of experience and knowledge in this area. We'd love to learn from you. It's going to be over phone or Zoom or Google, in person, that still happens. And, sometimes I'll throw in the odd personalization, especially if I'm following up. I'll say, oh, I was on your site and I saw this and I thought I'd really love to talk to you about this case study we saw, or I saw this on your social profile. I thought it'd be interesting to dig into that. It's really about making sure they understand you're there just to learn from them, not try to sell them anything. So now you got to talk to them. And for some people that can be nerve-wracking, especially if you've never done it. So I pulled out, there's a lot that I'm going to have in my other guide, but I pulled out what I think is the most important. And the first 3 points I have there is avoid a massive list of questions. And there's a reason for that. When I started as a reporter, and many of them who will tell you this when they start, sometimes you're so focused on asking the next question, you forget to actually listen to what people are saying. And I would go back to the newsroom and I would plug in my tape and they would be saying all these things and I missed like the best thing they said that I could have asked a follow-up question on. But because I was so hyper focused on like getting all my questions in, I missed it. So what I do now is I take my research objective, I break that down into themes and subtopics that I want to know. And then I write all my 3 to 5 or 6 questions underneath that. And what I have it all beside me as I'm talking, interviewing people, and I'm just marking things off like a check mark. Because I'll know if I'm listening, I can go and say, oh, they said it on their own. I don't need to ask that question because that was part of my research objective. So it takes a bit of practice to do that. But if you can get in that mindset, is like it helps as a guide to help you sort of navigate a discussion. There's some researchers that have no questions and they just start with one and they just say, let's start with the time you started thinking about buying the software. What happened next? And they just keep asking follow-up questions. I don't suggest doing that for your first one because that can be a little nerve-wracking. But if you can at least sort of organize the questions in that way, I think that's going to help a lot. And ask one question at a time, which sounds very silly. But humans have this really deep desire to like double and triple up questions. Sometimes they call them double barrel questions. And what that looks like is, I'd love to know about the first time you saw our product and what do you think about it when you use it for the first time? Those are 2 questions. And what happens is people will either answer one or they'll give you half answers for both. Because they're trying now mentally to figure out, okay, well, which question's more important? They ask 2 questions. So you're always best to ask one question at a time and then ask the next question. I hope this works. I'm going to play a clip. So this is from an actual interview I've conducted, and it talks about asking why. So let's hope you can hear this. Were there any anxieties or concerns you had as you're talking to them about sort of how they talk about what they did?
Price.
Okay, walk me through what's the issue with price?
And when I looked into everything, it appeared to me that this was going to take some of the workload off.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our main reason to go full on 100% with.
When you say take some of the workload off, can you just walk me through a bit of that? Like what is the workload?
Okay, I'll take you from beginning to end of what happens is.
Yes, please. That'd be great. So why is your most powerful question? But if you notice, I don't really use why a lot. And there's a reason for that. Why gets to behaviors and motivations, and it's the best follow-up question naturally. The challenge with why is that it starts to sound like an interrogation if you use it all the time. Well, why'd you do that? 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 And it can put people on defense, make them very defensive after a period of time. So if you notice, I've even done it here in this our time together. Walk me through. That's interesting. Can you expand on that? That's so interesting. I never thought of that. I'd love to hear more. Those are the things I will use to rephrase why. And I just wanted to isolate it on its own slide because it's actually I think the most important question that you have in your toolkit when you're interviewing people. You have to be very conscious of you not sounding like your detective that has them in, on the stand, so to speak. And then actions and opinions. actions over
Yeah, I
opinions.
mean, between 27, so we started in 2017, and we were just like super busy with sort of like the initial load of work that we had gotten just through our own contacts. And then, yeah, like basically we were just like go all the time. So we had a really crappy like one-page website for the longest time. It was probably just like a one-pager. And yeah, and so really, it was really on like early 2020, like COVID hits. And then
So what I did there, I just wrote down 2020 because you said 2017 in the beginning and then 2020. And now what I've done is I can mark where everything is falls in that timeline if we go back to it. And then I know where the timeline is for after the fact.
a couple of our clients had sort of like slowed down their spending in those early weeks. And so I figured, okay, like now's a really great time. I can take a breath and focus on marketing for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, yeah, it seemed like a good time to do it.
So what did you do? So you have the thought, okay, so clients are slowing down spending. I need to get more in my pipeline, or at least get some more thought process. I think content marketing can help. What did you do next?
Right. So, see, I think the first thing I did was I actually went to.
What did you do next? And that's it. That's sort of the secret of the process right there. Why? What'd you do next? And it's people laugh when I show them this because they think it's so simplistic, but that's really what drives this is I'm starting at the beginning. I have the objectives of everything I want to know, and I figure out where to start and ask why and what do next. Because that gives me my actions, the behaviors, the stories, the narratives, the timeline. Because if I ask them their opinions, well, they're subjective, right? And if I ask that 100 SaaS DevOps leader their opinion, and then the CTO that supervised 20 people their opinion, they might be drastically different. And when I try to compare them, I'm comparing subjectivity, not objectivity. But if I ask them all their actions they took and behaviors and timelines and things of that ilk, I can see what paths they took and why they made certain decisions. And now I'm starting to find patterns. You get more statistical relevancy and not hypotheticals.
So what would like I love those examples. What would be like a bad question that would lead to an opinion versus a fact or a story?
Yeah, I mean, a leading question would be something along the lines of, how hard is it to do that? And it sounds like it's a simple question, but what you've done is they're now going to start looking at, oh, okay, I have to give them examples about what is hard. Whereas a better question would be, walk me through doing that, start to finish. What's the first thing you do? And then they'll start talking, and then it's more general about, they'll go to what they think is harmful or what is hard, but also what's easy, right? So it's a sort of slight mindset shift.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't ask certain questions around things like, if they say they were able to solve a problem with your tool and they're really ecstatic about it, like it just, I give the example of the workload. Well, what's the workload, right? And she got to the end of, this is just, did you not hear how much it is? It's a lot of workload. I'm like, and then you ask, how do you feel now? Oh, I feel like my day's so different. That's, I think, a great question that'll help in marketing, right?
Right.
So there's a distinction. The only reason I say that, Stacey, that I love actions and opinions, again, I want an objective opinion of how and why they buy, not the rosy stuff they give me in, social proof or case studies where, it's a world of roses. I want to understand how they actually evaluated these things so early on, how they prioritized that problem, how they prioritized my solution, and the trade-offs they had to make and what they were trying to learn, because then my marketing can influence that part of it. If that makes sense. So
Yeah, I mean, between 20.
Play it again. Bonus round. So organizing the data. And I get this is actually one of the ones I get the most, because they're like, well, what do you do? Because if I have, let's just say 15 interviews, they're all 45 minutes and I've transcribed them all. That's a lot. It is a lot of stuff. So different qualitative researchers, and now I'm going to speak in the academic, sort of from an academic lens. If you look at how qualitative research is aggregated in the academic world, there's different processes for it. There's no one best process. Everyone sort of has their flavor, right? And that sort of is true of all best processes. But they all share one commonality, which is it's about structuring and interpreting the data to derive insights. Some are just more complex than others. And when I talk to people who maybe have not done this work or starting it for the first time, I like simplicity out of the gate because it gets your feet wet. So I'm going to show you something called content analysis, which is a great option for beginners. And it involves just a few steps. So you go back, this is why I record everything and I transcribe everything. And you can record with Zoom and you can transcribe with AI tools for free. So, it's not like it's a dramatic cost of your time there or a cost of money. And what I will do is I will go and revisit everything. And I'm looking for themes and patterns from each answer, right? So sometimes what I'll do is I will go through an interview and a transcript. And I'll start marking things based on my research objectives, right? Because I have those to the side and all my subtopics. And I'll say that answer falls under this bucket. And then what I'll do is I'll group all those together after the fact, just copy and paste. And then I start doing something which qualitative researchers call codifying or creating codes. And I'm summarizing all those various parts of the qualitative answers and qualitative data sets. And this is what it looks like. This is from one of my actual reports. And the question they wanted me to ask specifically for that business is, what would have to be true for you to leave this paid service? It's for a content agency. These are the answers, right? So what I'm doing is I just aggregated all 15 of them and I summarized them. And I said, here's the aggregate of what would have to be true for your clients to leave you. And some were telling me already they're considering leaving. So that offers me some insight already into some business development or sales things. You might want to talk to these customers tomorrow. They might be leaving. So it gives you this an easy way to sort of take all that data and aggregate it all to come to some very easy or some simple sort of solution or some simple aggregate of all the qualitative insights. Any questions about that? I want to answer as many questions around that as possible. I'll check the chat. Oh, no one? We're good? Okay.
I think somebody could have a question.
Yeah, that's okay. We're getting close to the end. So a real life example, this is on my website. I worked with a company called Rewind, SaaS company. They provide backup software for major platforms like Shopify, GitHub, Confluence, Jira, QuickBooks. And their sales and marketing motion at the time was mostly inbound sales, right? So it's like people were coming in, self-install, and they had some partnerships really working well for them. But they had just acquired a GitHub backup solution and they wanted to start trying to do more in the market and go outbound. But when they did that, nothing was really working. And that's when sales sort of came to us and said, we think something's wrong. So I got tapped to start leading research for them. And here's what we did with Ahmet, who's product marketing manager. And when I spoke to him, he's like, even our digital marketing manager says, we don't feel like we have a good handle on the customers, who they are, what they care about. We had ideas, but we needed verification. And that is like the common thread I often find is we have a bit of it. We have a sense, we're not sure if we're right. One of the best ways to advocate for research. So we went and spoke to their buyers, why they bought it, what their role is, the company, all their pains, priorities, and anxieties, what the triggers were, and we figured out the timeline to a purchase and how they figured out they wanted to spend budget on this. Why this over everything else? And here's what we got out of it. So we got a new hypothesized ICP, and I say hypothesized because after this round, they did a massive one in the summer without me. They interviewed 40 non-buyers and built out one of the best persona ICP maps I've ever seen. It's pretty wild. But now it's even shifted a little further, and they're even more specific where they want to go. But we got hypothesized ICP, an average buying story, which actually hasn't changed much, new messaging and positioning, ideas for go-to-market. We've built new buyer personas, new sales enablement. I rewrote all their ads for them, revised all the product and landing pages, updated the marketplace listings, and you can see the language that we, right here on the side. We went from selling the features, which everyone does, to isolating one of the most painful use cases that people were doing, and we didn't know to the extent of what they were doing, because developers love to build their own stuff, but man, they kept failing 99% of the time with this. So we just changed it. Like, don't waste your time doing this. Guess what? Installs doubled over 2 months. And Ahmet didn't believe it at first. He's like, let's give it another month. After 2 months, went up, right? Here's the key takeaway though. And what we realized was all that marketing we were doing there was for their low value customers. We had nothing, zero things talking to their high value customers that they wanted to go after. None of our positioning, our messaging, our marketing, our content spoke to any of the problems they had. So how would they even realize that we're for them? So it was a key wake-up point for them. And that's what spurred that research in the summer, because we realized there's this North Star we have here that are like the meaty deals, and we know nothing about them. So that's why I like to do customer research. Questions?
That's awesome.
All righty. I went longer than I thought, Stacy. Sorry, I was hoping to keep that around.
No,
20
that's
minutes, but-
perfect. I mean, I'd like to open it up for questions. Or hear from the group in terms of like, has anybody ever conducted customer interviews?
I have a question for Ryan. Thank you. This is super helpful to see this packaged in one place. How long from thinking end to end to starting the interviews, implementing the new copy,
Yeah.
and those sales? What kind of process does that look like? Because managing expectations with stakeholders, of course, is the biggest piece when
Yeah.
implementing something new like this.
I hate the depends answer. It's like it depends. But
Yeah.
so what I will say is I budget a quarter, which is longer than most people want. But the reason I say that is getting people is going to be the hardest part. Unless you pay for access to people, getting them to book to an interview is going to be the longest stretch. And simply because you're not the priority, right? And it's not because people don't want to help. They do. They just have 1,000 other things in their day, right? So them participating in an hour-long conversation for market research is not high on the priority list. That said, the fastest I've ever turned a project around start to finish is 4 weeks. And that's because I was working with someone that he's a solo agency working in pharmaceuticals. So he had like one person show, but massive contracts, like 6-figure contracts. And they had everyone lined up like that. So it was great. That's not always the case. Sometimes it can take, 4 weeks to get everybody. So when you're managing the expectations, I think that's the best way to do it. What I'm doing now is I'm working with a company. They're a SaaS company. They just raised a Series B, about 70 million. So, and they're just starting to build out a massive marketing team, and the research is a big gap they've highlighted. So we're paying user interviews to just give us access to everyone like really quickly, because actually they don't have a ton of customers yet that we can go to that fit the ICP where they want to go. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Ryan, I have a question.
Yes.
As we said earlier, many marketers don't get a chance to interview customers, either just due to bandwidth or sales won't let us or whatever the reason. So my question is more of when we do get that opportunity, for example, a customer conference, what I try to do is go around to where their demos are at or where we're having lunch and we get to intermingle with customers. what would be 2 or 3 questions we should ask
Yeah.
a customer? Because typically I say, well, what do you like about it? How, why did you choose us? Just try to pick their brain a little bit, and you get a little bit of information at least to try to get to know those customers. I guess recommendations of that kind of small talk, but to get some insight.
Yeah, it's tough, right? I'll answer that specific one about getting access after I answer your question, because I think it's something that Stacy brought up at the beginning. I think important. I can give you some thoughts around that. But yeah, I've been on that. We're on the show floor. You want to try and talk to people. I think you want to understand what it is you want to know in that quick setting, and have sort of that predetermined list. For me, I'd want to understand, why did that problem exist in the first place? I'm just trying to understand your industry. Like, why is this a thing? And you'll start understanding about why they cared about all these various aspects of your way before they hit your product, right? That's where I would start the conversation, because the questions you asked are post or pre-sale. Why did you like us? Why'd you choose us? Why'd you choose us is a sales exercise, really, at the end of the day. But as a marketer, you're going to want to influence even farther up the field, right? So you can, like, why is this a problem in your industry? Why is this a problem for you? Is that help?
Yes, I have several different product lines. So I'm meeting with lots of different people. And so I'll have analytics folks, or I'll have people that are, so I'm mixing and mingling with lots of different customers and different products that they have. And so I'm always like trying to figure out, okay, what should I ask them? What would be really good information?
So you can ask them just like, why is this product needed in the first place? Or what did you use even before you had us? Like, how are you solving this problem? Or just with curiosity, right? If I may, I want to just touch on the, how do you get buy-in? Because I get that one a ton. Sales owns customers, customer research owns customers. I'm not sure what you do, Stacy, but this is how I frame it now. And it's all around like marketing teams, and the discretionary budget they get are often one of the biggest chunks, if not the biggest chunk for a company, especially that's growing. So you have your headcount plus all your discretionary budget, where you're buying all your fancy tools and buying all your ads and all that. I always say, how do you know you're spending this money effectively? And if you ask that to a C-suite, then their ears and eyes light. Their ears perk up, their eyes light up. They're like, that's a great question. I said, how would you like to understand if you are? And that's how I tend to get buy-in, right? Because it's always about, well, leads and revenue. Sure. But cash flow, as long as the 20 years I've been in B2B, is always very important. So, how, and capital expenditures, like, how do we know this money is being spent effectively? Because I want to spend every dollar as best I can. Because a business is a bet, right? It's a bet in the market. You think it's you hoping you win, and there's a lot of factors you can't control. So wouldn't you want to try and de-risk and mitigate all the things you can control? So that's how I phrase it. I know what you do, Stacy, but that's sort of how I approach it these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, there's a little bit of education that research basically needs to be in the budget at least once a year. Right. In B2C, I came from B2C and then I switched over to B2B. And in B2C, we always had a budget for research. It was just, it was never contested.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in B2B, it was like, well, go ask the sales team instead of doing real research. And so I think one is just like education on that piece. I think two is around finding a trigger. So like new product launches is a great one, or trying to get into new customer segments, or trying to expand certain geographies or certain customer segments. That can also be a trigger for, hey, we actually don't know, like, how are we going to be smart, and how can we make smart decisions? We don't know what we don't know. We need to do research. And so finding something that you could tie it back to that's an objective for the business tends to work as well.
And sometimes you can start small and on your own, right? I've done that too. Or I just picked up the phone and called customers and begged for forgiveness later. Yeah, but I've always been very brash when it comes to that.
Love it. Any other questions from anybody?
Anybody? No, I think
I'll ask then.
Oh, Andrew.
Okay.
Real quick, Ryan, not sure how much your work gets into this, but since we're on the broader topic of customer research,
Yeah.
where do you feel like there's, an overlap, or how do you use, or have you used, conducting surveys alongside customer interviews? And where can there be overlap? Like where can you kind of marry those processes, and where are they just separate animals?
So I look at surveys as sort of what happened rather than why, right? Because it's data you aggregate, usually with very specific questions. How did you find us? What a classic one, right? For marketers. And then you're just aggregating 400, 500, 600 answers to find the commonalities and just putting them in the chart. It's great. That's great stuff to know. Or I know it's Slack. When Bill Makaitis took over as a CMO a few years ago, they did this thing where they were trying to understand in different markets what people's perception of, because their whole thing at the time was, we're going to replace email. So they actually tested that. They wanted to see if anyone actually understood that slogan and was going to replace email with Slack. And they went and tested that in surveys, right? It was very interesting. But it still doesn't get like, why would they do that then? Like, why would you replace email with Slack?
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, is the key distinction. How they can overlap, though, and I don't think there's any right or wrong way, but I've done both. I don't do surveys anymore, but the surveys sometimes help us understand what topics we want to dig into deeper, right? So if something comes up in a survey and there's a very interesting finding, and we're like, did you know this? And like, so then you can just book some conversations to dig deeper into it, or vice versa, right? You can do some interviews, find some key messaging, and then interview at scale to test that, right? So I know I mentioned Anita Toth. She had something I think like that today on LinkedIn, where she actually uses interviews and then surveys, right? Which I was like, oh, interesting. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I think they're just, one's quantitative, one's qualitative, one is the what. It's like Google Analytics is what happened. I try to get to the why, behaviors and actions. Does that help?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I've done a bit of both in the past. And one thing I found that can be really helpful is if you do a customer survey, include a question to see if they're open to an interview.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's how I filled my queue of interviews for like 2 quarters, was a mass all customer survey. And if you said you were open to it, I was going to make the ask.
1,000%.
Thank you very much.
I think everyone should do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks for the question. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Telephone surveys is a nice combination. That's true. Sorry, Stacey, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thank you, everybody, for joining. If I put a link to SOAR Marketing Society in the chat, if you're not already a member, please join. We're going to post the replay along with Ryan's slides there, and we'll hope to see you at the next event coming up. I think it's next week.
And if anyone has more questions, I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in Ryan Paul Gibson. I probably am the first person that comes up, and I'm always happy to answer questions there.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. This
Thanks,
was
everybody.
amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And super insightful, and hopefully everybody learns a little something new today. So
Perfect.
Appreciate your time and your
My
insight.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day, everybody. Bye.